So you guys have been reading along with Proverbs, right? Am I doing good? Excellent. So if you remember, what you've seen is two women, basically, which are the personification of one is, her name is Wisdom. She is the personification of wisdom. The other is foolishness or folly. And she is the personification of acting foolishly. You remember we talked about how wisdom, for our definition, our working definition for this series is wisdom is correct knowledge correctly applied. And you need both of those halves to be wise. You've got to know the right thing and you have to apply it correctly to walk in wisdom. And so today we're going to talk about folly. We're going to talk about foolishness. We're going to talk about the lure of foolishness in our lives. And of course there is a lure of foolishness, right? For some reason in our hearts we want to do foolishness. Right? No, we don't. None of us want to do foolishness, right? I don't get up in the morning and say, hey, I think I'll do some foolishness today. Though sometimes I end up doing foolishness anyway, because I'm not using correct knowledge and applying it correctly. But that's never my plan first thing in the morning. But I get lured into foolishness. I get lured into the wrong path. And so today we're looking at this passage where the author, Solomon, is talking about how first of all, Solomon's a bit of a creeper. He's peeking out the lattice of his window and he's watching what's going on in the street. And he sees a simple man walking on the way which eventually leads to death. And that's, the end of the story is this foolishness eventually leads to death. And we're going to see how that progresses as we go along here. So we've got these two women, and it's important to understand that foolishness is another way to say sin. Now we think of sin as something that is morally wrong, something that we do on purpose against God, which is often the case. But really sin simply means to miss the mark, to not hit the bullseye on God's plan for our lives. So anything that is foolishness is actually sin. And when we are about to sin, what comes before that is temptation. So I'm going to use the word temptation to talk about the lure of folly in our lives. So the first thing that we need to understand as we talk about the lure of folly is that temptation, the desire to do foolishness, is primarily an internal thing. If you're keeping score on your outline, temptation is internal. We like to say, oh no, that bag of M&Ms tempted me, or something like that. But it's not the bag of M&Ms that's tempting, it's me, right? It's my own desire to eat way too much sugar in a single sitting that causes me to be tempted to do the things that I shouldn't do. Some people think that God is the one who provides or gives these temptations. But the Bible says no, God is never the cause of temptation. In James we read that temptation is our own desires that have gotten out of line, and we've been enticed by them. That's James chapter 1, it says that. So it's our own desires and fears and habits which cause us to miss the mark of God's perfect way of life. Sometimes it's on purpose, right? Sometimes we miss God's mark on purpose, and sometimes we miss it by accident. We just don't know any better. I think we can all agree with that. So I'm not going to talk about the foolishness that we do when we don't know any better. Right? The answer to that is to know more, right? To study God better, to read the Bible, and to spend time in prayer, and to spend time with other Christian people and other believers so that we learn more about God and how to follow Him more perfectly. But that's not today's message. Today is about how we get lured into doing something that we know we shouldn't do. Now we're going back to our passage here. We see the simple young man. He is... It says, I perceived among the youths a young man without sense, passing along the street near her corner, taking the road to her house in the twilight and the evening. So here's this young man, and he's taking this road that goes to her house. Now, we don't know, right? I'm reading between the lines. But I think that this young man, I think he knows exactly where he's going, right? I mean, all right, let's take a minute. I would like you to think about temptation in your life. Right? think about something that you are tempted to do that you know God doesn't want you to do. If you say to me, oh no, there's no temptation in my life, you're not trying hard enough. Because the truth is, we all have some temptation. We all have a desire to do something that we know that God doesn't want us to do, or to not do something that God does want us to do. Either one of those. All right, so I want you to think, and throughout this message, I want you to hold that thought, hold that temptation in your mind, because that's what we're talking about, right? We're not talking about this young man and the harlot that he meets on the road, right? We're talking about you and me, and we're talking about our temptation in our lives. So let's make sure we correctly apply the knowledge that we're getting. So if we're talking about that temptation, so this young man, his temptation is to sleep with another man's wife, right? I mean, that's what's happening here. And he has decided that he's going to walk past her house at night, right? That's his decision. He decided that long before he committed adultery with this woman. He decided that when he took the road. And we do the exact same thing. We decide early that we are going to put ourselves in a place where sin is a possibility. That's what we do. We know when I decide to go with this group of people who are my friends, and I know that whenever I go there, it's a terrible place of gossip, right? I know that going there, it might just cause some gossip. I might hear something really juicy, right? And we decide that before we even go there. This young man knew what he was doing. So the first thing that we have to do, the first thing we have to understand is to know ourselves, right? We have to be honest with ourselves. We have to be willing to say, yes, I have a problem with whatever it is you're thinking about. And it's up to me to take some kind of steps to mitigate that, right? I know in my life I'm going to be tempted with this, therefore I need to try to do something about it. We're going to talk about a little more of that in a bit. But the truth is, a lot of temptation, well, all temptation starts in our heart. And then when the opportunity comes, then we act on it, and that action then becomes sin. Let me be very clear, temptation itself is not a sin. It's the acting on the temptation that crosses the line. And that's what we have to be careful of. So the first point is temptation is internal, and we need to know that. We need to recognize ourselves as people with a fallen nature. And yes, Christ has saved us, and he is changing our nature, but none of us in this building are there yet. We all still have temptation. The second point that we see from this is that temptation is everywhere. Right? Now, I would like to say that this young man would have been safe if he just would have taken another road, right? But that's not what the scripture says. It says in verse 12, it says that this woman, the harlot, is now in the street, now in the market. At every corner she lies in wait. And in our lives, that's the same thing. The temptation is everywhere. Just because we say, I'm not going to take that road, just because we say, I'm not going to meet with that group of people in this situation, doesn't mean that the temptation isn't going to happen. We know that temptation is there. And we have to be careful of it. Even in our normal days, we have to have a strategy to overcome it. I heard there's a great story, and it's a true story, about a pilot, and I think I've told this story before, but he had a problem with pornography, right? And he was wanting to be a godly man, and he wanted to put pornography out of his life, but he had a terrible time with the television that was in his hotel room when he flew somewhere, right? He was always flying, he was always on the road, he was always staying in hotels, and every single hotel room had a television in it, and he was unable to resist the pornography that was available to him every single night on this television. So he made a plan. He had a strategy to overcome this. He made a deal with his co-pilot. And he said, he was honest, he was open, and he said, I'm having a problem with pornography, so what I would like to do is when we get to the hotel, I'm going to disconnect my television, and I'm going to put it in your room for the night. And then in the morning, we'll put it back just the way it was. That was his plan for getting the opportunity to view porn out of his life. And in the same way, you need to have a strategy, right? Now, this pilot, he couldn't not fly, and he couldn't not stay in a hotel, but you have the choice whether to leave the TV there. So in your life, with whatever temptation that you're dealing with, what can you do to mitigate that? What can you do? What kind of plan can you make? And it may be accountability. I have a couple of friends who also are struggling with porn in the same way the pilot is. And so what they have done is they've put something on their computer called Covenant Eyes. And Covenant Eyes sends a report to me whenever they go on something on a website that they shouldn't go on. It's a fail-safe for them to protect their computer. And I'm their accountability partner, and I'm there to help them. And if any of you are having similar trouble with pornography, I would be happy to be that for you as well. I would be happy to monitor your computer usage if that helps you get rid of that temptation in your life. And of course, there's other ways of temptation in pornography, but that is one way to help. So you need to have a strategy, I guess is my point. Temptation is everywhere. You never know where you're going to run into some temptation. And so you need to have a strategy to overcome it when it pops up. The third point is, I guess it's obvious, temptation is persuasive, right? The reason that we're tempted is because it's something that we want to do. Have any of you ever been really tempted to drink prune juice? I personally have never been tempted to drink a prune juice. I've been forced against my will, but I've never been tempted. I've never wanted to drink the prune juice, right? And so, no problem there. But temptation is inherently attractive. It's inherently something that we want to do, otherwise it wouldn't be temptation. So we have to understand that it's something that is perhaps good, right? This young man, he's on his way and he's going to have sex with this woman. There's nothing wrong with sex. Sex is a good thing. The problem is he's doing it out of the proper context of marriage. And so he's taken something good and it's been perverted. In our lives, there's all kinds of good things that get perverted into sinful activity. Those things aren't bad in themselves, but they're taken out of context. They're done wrong. For instance, money, right? Is there anything wrong with money? No, there's nothing wrong with money. Money's a good thing. We all need money in our lives to do the things we want to do. But if we decide that money is our highest value, that money is what we need above all else, then we'll do things, we'll be tempted to do things like maybe cheat on our taxes, right? Or steal things that don't belong to us. Or I know a woman, this was a woman that we knew when we lived in Wisconsin. To say she valued $1 was an overstatement. I mean, she held $1 in the tightest fist you've ever seen. In fact, when she wanted something at the store, she would go to the store and buy a dress, wear the dress to whatever party she wanted to go to, and then return the dress, even though she knew there was nothing wrong with the dress. She just wore it the one time, and she wanted to save the money, right? She was sinning. You know people like that? You do? Oh boy, I thought that was a one-off thing. Hopefully it's not you. Hopefully you're not the ones who are buying a dress and returning it afterwards so that you can show off to your friends what nice clothing you have and not have to spend the money to do it. It's easy. It's easy because it's something that we want to have, to fall into temptation. And you'll notice that it's easy to make those excuses, right? Here in our story, the woman says to the man, oh, look what I've done to my house. It's a great place for lovemaking. Oh, it'll be so great and wonderful. And not only that, in verse 19, but my husband is not at home. He has gone on a long journey. He's not going to be around for a while. No one will ever know. Right? The death knell of temptation. No one will ever know. Be careful when you say that to yourself, because what you're saying is, I'm about to sin. I'm trying to figure out a way to make this sin work in my life. And yet you know that it's taking you away from God. Because sin, point 4 on your outline, is deadly. That's how our little story ends up, as this young man finds himself caught in a snare like a bird. And he does not know that it will cost his life. Sin in our lives, which is what temptation leads to, sin is deadly. And it may not be physically deadly, right? It may not be something that literally kills us, but it will kill portions of our life. It may kill my relationship with God, right? Have you ever sinned knowingly and you just said, God, I don't really care what you want. I know that I'm going to do my own thing. I think most of us have done that. I've done that. Because I want this more than I want to follow God at this singular moment in my life. Whatever it is more important to me than God. And then my relationship with God is damaged. I'm not as close to God anymore. I'm not interested in praying anymore. I'm not interested in reading the Bible. I'm not interested in going to church. Why? Well, because I know what I have done. I know that I have offense against God. Now, is God mad at me? Is God... Is the relationship damaged on God's side? No. No, Jesus knew what I was going to do long before I ever did it. Jesus died on the cross for whatever it is I want to do. Jesus is like the prodigal father who's saying, come back, please. And all we have to do is turn. But the prodigal son was there eating with the pigs, and that's what I do when I am feeling the guilt of turning away from God, as I choose to stay and eat with the pigs instead of come back to my Father's house because of my heart, because I'm ashamed of what I've done. My relationship with God is damaged on my side of the register, not on his. But it hurts our relationship with God. It may hurt our relationship with other people. Anger is listed as a sin in the Bible. Do you know any angry people? Do you know any people who get so mad when they don't get their way that they fly off the handle and start yelling and screaming and throwing things? No? Yes? Yeah, there are people like that. Do you like to hang out with those people? I don't, because you never know when you're tiptoeing around. Whatever I do, I can't make this person mad or it's going to be a bad scene. My relationship with those people is broken because of their sin of anger. And maybe it's gossip, or maybe it's greed, or maybe it's whatever. I mean, the person who never picks up the check at lunch, maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe they just are that tight with money that they don't want to spend it. And you say, I'm not going to lunch with that person. They never pick up the check, right? It hurts relationships. Sin hurts relationships. Is that news, by the way? No. You guys know all this. And I know you know it, which is why I remember I was hesitant to go through Proverbs, because I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know. But what I am saying is apply it. Correct knowledge, applied correctly, is wisdom. Act in wisdom by avoiding temptation where you can. Have a strategy to deal with it when you can't avoid it. Because the truth is, point 5 on your outline is temptation is easily defeated. Now, when I say easily defeated, I don't mean easily defeated. Yes, I do. No, I don't. Yes, I went back and forth whether I should use the term easily defeated. Because the truth is, it's very easy to defeat temptation if I want to. The problem with temptation is, as we said a minute ago, is I usually don't want to. If I'm being tempted at that time, what I want to do is whatever I'm being tempted about. But if I were to just remember, I am a child of the living God. And a child of the living God wouldn't act that way. That helps me in overcoming the temptation. It's not anything hard that I have to do. I just have to remember who I am in my Father's house. And remember that God has provided for me. He loves me. And that's not my identity, is the person who would do that kind of sin. You have to remember that in the midst of the sin. It's not hard. Nothing hard about that. Except that I don't want to do it. The other thing that we need to remember when we're in the midst of temptation, are you guys still thinking about that temptation in your mind and in your life that you deal with regularly? Are you thinking about it? Here's what it says. And I'm going to read it to you. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 10, starting in verse 13. You may want to jot this down. Not the verse, but the reference. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. You're not different. Whatever you're being tempted with has been happening for years and years and years. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond beyond your strength, but with the temptation will also provide the way of escape. God, your Father who loves you very much, will help you out of the temptation. He provides a way out. That's a promise. Talk about Proverbs being principles, but this is, in 1 Corinthians, that's a promise. God will help you escape that temptation if you just ask. When I said this series of messages was going to be practical, this is as practical as it gets. You will find yourself in temptation. You will desire to do something that is against God's best in your life. And you're going to want to do it. But if you can simply turn to God and ask for help in the moment, I guarantee you God will show you the way of escape. It may be as simple as saying no. Maybe as simple as turning your head. Maybe as simple as apologizing to someone who you're really ticked off at. I don't know what it may be, but God does, and you do. So this week, going forward, when you face that temptation, just ask your Lord and your Savior for help and look for a way of escape.